Hi, I'm Nikita Robinson, the president of the Southern Tier Young Professionals. Our organization encourages civic engagement among our members. One of the ways we do that is by meeting with our elected officials. Today, we had the opportunity to sit down with all three candidates of the 2020 22nd Congressional District Race, who include Democratic nominee and incumbent Congressman Anthony Brindisi, Republican nominee and former Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, and Libertarian nominee Keith Price. We asked the candidates a series of questions that may not have been presented at prior events. None of the questions were previously shared. Our moderator is Douglas Kameen. Douglas is a longtime and founding member of the Southern Tier Young Professionals. He served as a board member, vice president, and president. For your convenience, we combined the unedited interviews into one video. We thank the candidates for joining us to discuss their platforms in what is one of the most competitive congressional races in the country. As a reminder, early voting ends Sunday, November 1st, and the last day to vote is Tuesday, November 3rd. We hope that each of you exercises your right to vote. And without further ado, here are the candidates in sequential order of their interviews.
My name is Doug Kameen from Southern Tier Young Professionals, and we are conducting interviews with the candidates for New York's 22nd Congressional District. I am here with Congressman Anthony Brindisi, who is the Democratic incumbent. Thank you, Congressman Brindisi, for taking the time to sit and speak with us today.
Thanks, Doug, and thank you to Southern Tier Young Professionals for hosting this.
So we discussed this in advance. We have a series of questions that we're going to ask both you and your opponents, and we are looking forward to hearing your responses and understanding a little more about your positions on things that are important to the young folks here in the community.
Sounds good.
Great. So first question, Congressman, do you consider yourself to be bipartisan? And if so, how have you demonstrated that with your voting record? What are some of the representatives in the other party you have a cordial working relationship with and work with on bipartisan legislation? And how have you tried to bridge that gap? I know that's a lot of questions in one, so I'll give you some opportunity to answer it all.
I'm making notes, Doug. It's a great question, and I'll start off by saying that the key for me is to put country above party. So we're all Americans first, so before Democrat or Republican, we got to get things done. And the only way we can succeed as a country is if we work together, if the two parties are working together, and that's why every bill that I introduce always has a Republican co-sponsor along with it. And I've been very fortunate over the last 2 years since being in office to have 6 of the bills that I've authored signed into law by President Trump. That's quite an accomplishment for any member of Congress, let alone a freshman representative in divided government where you have Democrats in the House, Republicans in the Senate. The bills that I've worked on have really spanned a range of issues dealing with veterans' mental health and expanding access to suicide prevention services. Another bill that requires our military to purchase more American-made goods, and another bill that would repeal some health insurance taxes on health insurance policies that were set to go into effect this year. So I believe strongly in bipartisanship. I was actually awarded the most bipartisan member in Congress by an organization, a nonpartisan organization called Common Ground. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has actually given me an award for bipartisanship as well. So I believe deeply in it. I work very well with many members of Congress, I would say, in our region. Congressman Katko, who's a Republican colleague of mine from Central New York, as well as Congressman Reed, who is my colleague in the Southern Tier, and a fellow member of what's known as the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House, which I'm a member of as well.
Great. Thank you. So supporting the police and wanting them to be held accountable for wrongdoing are not mutually exclusive things. And I think we all agree that communities of color have legitimate concerns. So how have you shown your support to both of these groups? And how would you try to facilitate bringing these groups together to address the concerns that both sides do have?
Well, I think that's a great question, Doug, and you really hit the nail on the head in your question when you say that supporting law enforcement and supporting Black Lives Matter don't have to be mutually exclusive. You can do both. You can be outraged when you see a murder take place like the murder of George Floyd. We can all be supportive of more accountability within law enforcement. We also understand how dangerous a job law enforcement is, and we want to make sure that police officers are properly funded so they can have the right training. They can have things like body cameras, which have shown to hold bad actors accountable, and we can have more community engagement programs within our cities and towns among our police departments so they can get into the community and really build trust with the communities that they are protecting and serving. So at the national level, I have supported legislation that would call for more police accountability and better training and standards among law enforcement. But I'm also someone who is against defunding the police. I think we have to have police departments that are well trained. And I've actually introduced legislation that would prevent cities from defunding the police. We do have to invest more in mental health care. We do have to invest more in education. And we do want to have stronger accountability. And ultimately, what it comes down to is we want a fair and just and equitable society for this generation and future generations. We can do both by holding officers who violate their oath accountable, and also making sure that we have well-funded police departments that can do the things they need to do to keep us all safe.
So as a follow-up to that, one of the big challenges is that when people speak about defunding the police, a lot of times they're talking about, and you brought this up, mental health issues and addressing those as well. And one of the core concerns is moving some of the responsibility for dealing with these issues to, say, mental health professionals instead of the police in certain instances where it may be appropriate. What's your stance on that?
Well, we certainly need to give officers more tools to be able to deal with some of the challenges that they're confronting in the 21st century. You know, policing today is much different than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. And law enforcement are expected to do a whole host of jobs that sometimes they need help with. You know, they're mental health counselors. They have to be educators in addition to their job as being police officers. So we should get more help to officers to be able to help deal with some of the mental health challenges they may confront out on the street. We also have to recognize that there are some situations where people are violently mentally ill, and you may not want to send a mental health counselor into a situation that could become violent without having an officer there to help deal with the situation. But it also gets back to before the situation escalates to a point where law enforcement has to be called in, I would ask the question, what are we doing on the front end to try and help people who are struggling with mental health challenges? What are we doing to invest in community-based programs? What are we doing overall in terms of our funding for education and mental health services, particularly in underserved areas, which tend to be in the inner cities or in the more rural communities where poverty is higher? So until a situation escalates to a point where someone who may have a substance misuse disorder or a mental health condition is referred over the criminal justice system, we need to be doing more investments early on to prevent that from happening.
Thank you. So many young Americans are delaying starting families and becoming homeowners because of the amount of student loan debt that they owe. How will you help student loan borrowers, and are you in favor of debt forgiveness? If so, how much? And could you elaborate on any plans that you might have or support?
Absolutely. Well, first, the student debt crisis is growing. It's now the second largest consumer debt in our nation. On average, it takes a borrower somewhere in the neighborhood of 21 years to repay their student loan debt. And that complicates their ability to borrow for other important items throughout life, whether it's a new car, whether it's a home loan, or a small business. Perhaps if you want to start a small business, it's harder with a substantial amount of student loan debt. So a couple of things I think we have to be doing. One is we need to make stronger availability of what's known as Pell Grants. I would actually propose expanding Pell Grants to help students who who can't afford to go to college be able to go to college. I think that in terms of federal student loan, Congress can weigh in and reset interest rates to a lower rate for student loans. I think they should be more in line with what you see for a home loan or a small business loan, but they're much higher right now. I think we should allow some debt forgiveness in addition to allowing student loan debt to be discharged in bankruptcy. I also think that we should be looking at what kind of careers are available around the southern tier and throughout the country, and putting programs in place to prepare young people for the kinds of jobs that are in high demand right now. And one of those areas is I tour around the southern tier and talk to manufacturers or business owners around the region. They're hiring, and they have a hard time finding people with the right kinds of skills to meet the job openings that they have, particularly in manufacturing. And when you think of manufacturing nowadays, it's not what we all may have this image of, where you're sitting on an assembly line, it's dirty. That's not what it's like today. It's done in clean rooms. It's done in on robotics, in 3D printing, AI. So there's so many careers out there that don't require a 4-year degree or a postgraduate degree. There's so many jobs out there right now that may just require a community college degree, a certificate program, or a union apprenticeship type program. And those are the kinds of careers that are in high demand right now. They start off at good salaries with benefits, and they don't carry a whole load of student loan debt along with them.
Great, thank you. So to follow up on that a little bit, you mentioned about the idea of technical careers,
yes,
as opposed to full 4-year college career, university track folks. I think one of the things that sometimes people have is a perception that those careers may not have as much stability or as much long-term earning power. And that probably plays into a lot of other issues, how the wage structure is set up. In manufacturing, layoffs can come quickly and unexpectedly at certain times and things of that nature. Are there ways that you see to address those types of concerns, to spin up those types of technical programs and steer people appropriately into those when it is the best fit for them?
Sure. I would say that my first step into public service was on my local school board, and then I was in the state legislature for a number of years. So I'm very familiar with the education system here in New York State, and actually helped create a career and technical education pathway for students coming out of high school when I was a member of the state assembly. What we have to do is we have to start earlier in a student's career, even in the middle schools, exposing them to some career and technical education coursework. The studies have really shown that earlier exposure to career and technical education, even if a student doesn't go into a CTE field, they have shown to have better outcomes and higher student performance later on when they go to college. So I think we have to start exposing young people to career and technical education. We also have to support our manufacturers so there is more stability in those kinds of jobs. When you look at, as I mentioned earlier, some of the manufacturing that's being done, we could be really on the cutting edge of some of this stuff here in the southern tier and across upstate New York. When you look at some of the advanced manufacturing that's happening across the country, there are certain things that I don't want to see outsourced to other countries. And we have become too over-reliant as a nation on adversaries like China for manufacturing. Particularly in the latest last couple of months, we've seen that in terms of the shortages with PPE and medical supplies due to the coronavirus. So one of the big pushes that I'm making at the federal level is to bring a lot of that manufacturing back home. I think places like the southern tier are prime areas with our proud manufacturing past to be able to make some of this stuff back in this country. And the way you can do that in Congress as a representative is by passing legislation requiring our federal agencies like the Department of Defense or Homeland Security to purchase more American-made goods, particularly when it comes to things like medical supplies and PPE. We can make that stuff here, and that would provide more long-term stability, keep us safer here in the homeland by not being reliant on an adversary like China during a national emergency, and create some good paying jobs for people back home.
Great. Thank you. So next question. The 22nd Congressional District is medically underserved. There's a physician shortage that is expected to worsen as more physicians go into retirement. Congress, through Medicare funds, they generally control how many residency spots are available nationwide. To train more physicians, Congress needs to approve more residency slots. The Resident Physician Shortage Act of 2019 was a bill that was introduced in the House. It stalled. How do you think Congress should best address this crisis?
Well, first, I am a co-sponsor of that legislation. We do have to expand the number of residencies throughout the region, and I'm also supportive of other measures such as loan forgiveness programs for healthcare professionals who will go work in underserved areas, particularly in our rural communities, and that's all around the 22nd district. It is a real problem, and you know, I sit on a few different committees that are dealing with that issue right now. I'm working on that as a member of the Veterans Committee because there's tremendous shortages within the VA as well, and it gets even worse when you get into more rural areas, as well as on the Agriculture Committee. And look, agriculture, you're focused on you know, the products that we produce here in the U.S., but you're also focused on some of the issues that are facing rural communities, like mental health shortages of healthcare workers. So I think, yes, number one, we've got to expand residency programs and slots. I think we should have more loan forgiveness for workers, healthcare professionals that go into underserved areas. I also think that we need greater emphasis on telehealth, and that is something that the VA has done for quite some time, but you're starting to see other professions and other medical, other areas of the medical community start to see more emphasis on telehealth. And I think that can help meet some of the shortages that we're seeing. One key point to that is you got to have the infrastructure in place to bring telehealth into rural areas, and that's why we need investments in high-speed internet and cell phone coverage in our more rural communities, which is another issue I'm working on in the House right now.
Great. So you mentioned that you were a co-sponsor of the Resident Physician Shortage Act, and that stalled. Just for curiosity, not getting too deep into the weeds, how did that get stalled, and where does it stand? What would potentially break that out?
You know, that's a good question. I would say, and I don't sit on the committee of jurisdiction, so I wouldn't be privy as to what work is happening within that particular committee on that legislation. I know it does have bipartisan support, so it's something that I do see advancing in the future. I think a lot of legislation has stalled in the last 7 months because of the coronavirus, and all the attention in Congress has really shifted to responding to the public health crisis and the economic fallout. But as this virus, you know, as we hopefully get a vaccine and we can see an end to this health crisis, then legislation like this can start to move forward. But look, we should be able to walk and chew gum as well, and I'm supportive of working to try and address these things. Even during a pandemic, we should be doing that as well.
Great, thank you. So next question for us. Agricultural subsidies. Generally speaking, the majority of agricultural subsidies are going to large farms and not to small farms. We're curious, you know, our area in particular is filled with a large number of small farms. Dairy farms is a prominent farming type in our region here. How would you address this disparity of the large farms to the small farms? And would you be in favor of, in future legislation, a carve out that specifically diverts funds away from the larger farms to the smaller ones?
Yes, short answer is yes. You know, the top reason I wanted to serve on the Agriculture Committee down in Washington is because I wanted farmers in upstate New York to have a voice on that committee. I think it's been something like 40 or 50 years. I don't have the exact number since we've had a member from this particular area on the Agriculture Committee down in Washington. It's one of the top committees I had asked for, because if you look at the farms in our district, you had mentioned it in your question, we have very small farms. You know, 96% of the farms in our district are family farms. And those are the ones that are struggling the most right now with the economic fallout due to the pandemic. So I would certainly be in favor of shifting subsidies to help smaller farms. I don't want to see these smaller farms go out of business. And you had talked about dairy, which is an area that's been hit very hard by this pandemic due to restaurants being shut down for a while, and school lunch programs not serving to the same capacity they were prior to the pandemic. So that means excess milk supply is not getting into those areas, and that's forced a lot of processors to have to dump milk because there's too much supply, and then the price has plummeted. The price is starting to go back up, which is helping our dairy farmers, but they also need some help, and that's why I fought for, in both the CARES Act and subsequent legislation, to see direct aid going to family farms across this district and making available to them some of the Small Business Administration loan programs that historically were not available to farmers prior to the pandemic. I worked with a bipartisan group in the House to expand those loans to farmers so they can also take advantage of them just like any small business could. So I think going forward, we need to provide more support to our family farms. If we lose these farms, those of us who like to eat local, like to know where our food's coming from, are going to be forced to see, entire sectors of agriculture being controlled by 4 or 5 different companies or less. And that's not good for any of us. It's not healthy, it's not sustainable, and it's not good for the environment either.
Great. Thank you. Next up, the very broad question, but systemic racism. Do you believe it's something that occurs and is happening in our society right now, or exists in our society?
Yeah, I do believe racism still exists in our society, and it is in every sector of our society, whether it's in education, whether it's in the criminal justice system, whether it's in housing or banking and finance. Racism still does exist. I think number one, as elected officials, we have to make sure we're calling out acts of hate and acts of racism, and not trying to further fan the flames of division and hate in this country. So we have to lead by example, but we also have to look at how we right some of these historic injustices that have been around for generations, whether it's in education and making sure that funding is going to high-need school districts in urban areas or in high poverty areas, whether it's in housing by passing stronger anti-discrimination laws for people who may have been discriminated in housing or banking, whether it's in the criminal justice system and making sure there's more accountability in the criminal justice system. We have to address racism in our country. We've made a lot of progress, but we have seen, especially in recent years, that we have a long way still to go.
Great, thank you. And I think this is our last question, but daycare and childcare here in our area, there's a shortage. There's a shortage nationwide. It's acute here. It's been made more acute through the coronavirus pandemic. How do you see this issue? How do you think you can address it? And what have you done, if anything, at this point?
So it is a major issue. It was a big issue before the pandemic that has only worsened since the pandemic started. And if you don't have access to quality, affordable childcare, that's the biggest barrier usually to getting into the workforce and keeping people in poverty. So since the pandemic has happened, we've seen an increased need for childcare providers. As parents are working from home, kids are learning from home, everyone's lives have been uprooted by this pandemic, and we need to have childcare to help get people back to work. I've actually have co-sponsored a couple different pieces of legislation in the last 7 months that would provide more funding for childcare providers. There's one bill that would provide about $50 billion for childcare across the country, which is what childcare advocates have asked for. And I'm hopeful that in whatever next stimulus package we pass, that there is increased assistance for childcare. There's other areas that need assistance as well, whether it's state and local governments, because we're seeing cutbacks at that level. I think we need additional assistance for folks who are out of work. I'd like to see another round of direct stimulus payments to individuals and families in need. additional assistance for childcare and food assistance, because we're seeing a huge uptick in people utilizing food banks like in the Southern Tier, first time for many people. And we need to get more, we need to make sure we're providing food security for people as well. So I think we can help through the next stimulus package.
Okay. So that addresses, I think, the short term. I think that one of the bigger things about the childcare problem is that it's really, in some ways, it's a structural problem that exists over the long term. You know, there's not enough childcare providers. They're not paid enough. You know, a lot of things play into that. How do you see, and I understand this is probably more opinion about how you see the long term, how do you see how we can address that over the long term?
Well, I would say over long term, again, there has to be greater investment in childcare. As I mentioned, this is one of the biggest barriers to getting people back to work. And I can't tell you how many stories I've heard from people in this community who have been offered jobs, but have had to turn them down because they may lose a childcare subsidy, or just don't have, you know, a mom or dad or grandparent or someone who can help care for their child. So I think increasing access to childcare subsidies will help people afford to pay for childcare. It's expensive, and by helping to increase subsidies, people can afford to pay for childcare, and also we can have we can make sure we're paying childcare providers a decent wage, because it's difficult work, and you want to have properly funded childcare providers.
Great, thank you. All right, so last, you're running in what is considered one of the most competitive races in the United States, in the U.S. Congress. We do want to just give you the opportunity to state your case. Why should we re-elect you to be the representative from the 22nd Congressional District?
Well, as Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And I think we all can acknowledge, whatever side of the political spectrum we're on, that we're in a very divided country right now. I believe what we need in Washington are elected representatives who don't fan the flames of division. We need people who can actually bring us together and get things done. And I believe that when you compare myself and my opponent, I am the person who is better suited to bring people together. And I have shown that over the last 2 years. Despite being in divided government, I've had 6 bills that I've authored signed into law by President Trump. I've been rated as the most bipartisan member in Congress, and I work very closely with members on both sides of the aisle to get things done. We also need to have a representative that shows up and listens to the constituents, because that is really the most important part of the job, is being accountable and listening to your constituents. And that's why throughout my time in office, I've held town halls in every county across the district, and even when the pandemic hit and we had to switch to telephone town halls, we've been doing that right along to make sure that I'm hearing from the constituents, number one, and providing feedback to them and letting them know where I stand on some of the issues. So I'd be honored to be able to serve the people of the 22nd District for the next 2 years. As I always say, I work for them. This is their congressional seat. I'm the person that has been honored to hold that seat as their representative in Congress, and I'd be honored if they would support me again for 2 more years, so we can actually start to heal this country and get some things done.
Great. All right. Congressman Anthony Brindisi, the incumbent for the New York's 22nd Congressional District. Election is on Tuesday, so encourage everybody to get out to vote if you have not already early voted. Thank you for your time, Congressman.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Southern Tier Young Professionals.
I'm here with Claudia Tenney, who is the candidate for New York's 22nd Congressional District, the Republican candidate. Ms. Tenney, I thank you for joining us and being a part of these questions today.
Thank you, Doctor.
So we'll get right to it. So first of all, first question I should say, do you consider yourself to be bipartisan? If so, how have you demonstrated that with your voting record when you were in office? And who are some of the representatives in the other party that you have cordial working relationships with on bipartisan legislation?
Right. I think I'm probably the most bipartisan person in this race, particularly based on my voting record. My opponent says he's bipartisan, but really he just does that. He just introduces bills and they don't usually get passed. Almost every bill I introduced in the state legislature and every bill I introduced in Congress, unless it was like a district-specific bill, was bipartisan. And I worked with Democrats across the aisle all the time. I had to in the Assembly. Remember, we were 108 Democrats to 42 Republicans. Not once did Mr. Brindisi ever talk about working with Democrats when he was in the State Assembly with me, except for when we were at events together. So, and he had a very partisan record as he does in Congress. So I want to set the record straight on that. And in terms of bipartisanship, I actually was able to persuade a lot of Republicans to come to my side, particularly dealing with issues on the southern tier. Notably, the president, especially. We had a number of initiatives, and when the initial executive budget came out, a number of really important items were slashed. Number one, the Legal Services Corporation, which does legal aid. I won a legal aid award for my pro bono work for people who are truly needy that needed my assistance. I still do numerous hours of pro bono work, even though I'm not a full-time practicing lawyer, because it's something that I'm committed to. We also had the president also zeroed out the community development block grants. Those I actually worked hard to get. Not only did we get them restored, we actually got a 10% increase. And the same with the community service block grants. And those help a lot of our community action agencies, children in need, children that work in a lot of those, children that are in the inner cities who don't have access to get to school and also need pre-K and after-school activities. So we actually got those with a 10% increase as well. I also brought historic opioid funding to this district it was all bipartisan. All my work was bipartisan. Every initiative that was involving this region was bipartisan. One of the more important things that we did for this district, which actually, unfortunately, it's up in Oneida County, not in Broome County, but it's worth mentioning because I think you'd be surprised at some of the very partisan Democrats I was able to get to support some of my initiatives, including Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who many people know is probably not someone you would equate with me, but Debbie and I were members of the congressional softball team, which was the women's team was not only was it bipartisan, it was bicameral. So we had the Senate with us. So I got to meet and work with a lot of my colleagues in a way that you might not have been able to get to know them personally. And so we developed a great relationship and working on the Appropriations Committee where she helped me bring a lot of resources to Rome Labs, supported all these initiatives we're talking about. There's just a number of members, Connor Lamb, Juan Vargas, just Democrats all across the up and down, moderate to even someone as left as a Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who people would say, Republicans maybe, but, I got to know her and we got to be friends. So you never know, it's good that we got to work together. And another thing that my class did that I don't think any other congressional class has done is my class signed a commitment to civility. We did that. We actually did a floor speech with all of the freshmen Democrats and Republicans in 2017. We did it on Valentine's Day. And at that event, we made a pledge to make sure that all of our initiatives were bipartisan, that we do whatever we could to work with each other, especially on the other side of the aisle, to tone down a lot of the partisan rhetoric and to make sure that we were all working together. So, that's something no other class that I know of has done. And I can tell you right now, the 116th Congress did nothing of that sort. And we were always reaching out to our Democratic colleagues, and every freshman member signed that pledge except for 3 Democrats. And I'm still friends with these people today. They're still helpful. They're still working with us. So, it is really important, especially when I was in the majority. I didn't have to be bipartisan. I could have gotten all my bills passed. And that was something that I thought was really important to get done and to make sure. And the reason it's so important is that when you have an initiative and you want to get it passed on the floor, if you have a Democrat on that bill, the likelihood of getting it passed in the House and also getting Senate co-sponsorship, where there's a much closer alignment of Democrats and Republicans, it's always better to get that right out of the gate as bipartisan, and that's what we work to do. My staff got frustrated with me a lot because I did take my pledge to civility, and I did make sure that we had Democrats on our bills. I had 21 bills signed into law by President Trump across all different, spectrums. You'll hear my opponent say I didn't get any bills signed. I have 6 presidential pens, for bills that were my original co-sponsorship, and one was an executive order where my committee assignment was actually the Committee of Jurisdiction. So, it's really important we work together, but the first thing you have to do is advocate for your region, and then you compromise. So I think that's something that we did really well, and it's why I worked in the 115th Congress, which today, even some on the left are saying was the most productive Congress in decades. Today, even bipartisan people are saying the 116th is one of the least productive and most obstructive, and they've gone to session less days than any Congress in probably 30 or 40 years. They also gave up their proxy vote, which is something that's never been done in the history of the United States. So the representatives can actually give their vote to someone else. We elected them to vote for us. And I understand we're in the midst of a pandemic, but we've been through the Spanish flu, H1N1, other pandemics, the War of 1812, the Civil War, World War II, World War I, the Korean War, Vietnam, all these wars have occurred, and yet we have never seen the House of Representatives ever give up their proxy vote. It's not something that's been done in the Senate. So yeah, it's in terms of bipartisanship, I've been very bipartisan. I learned what it's like to have no pride in ownership when I was in the state assembly. No Republican has had a significant bill pass because of the hyper-partisanship of the Democrats who control everything in Albany and have controlled everything in the assembly since 1974. And because of that, no Republican has had a substantive bill pass the state assembly since 1974. So in terms of bipartisanship, numerous bills came up that would reform this process in Albany, and Anthony Brindisi voted against every single reform, including giving any member of the assembly at least just one bill, not to vote, and just get it to the floor, even if it gets voted down. Every bill that I had for veterans, he voted down in committee. And then once a Democrat co-sponsored it, the bill got to the committee and he voted for it. And I'm talking about bills that didn't even have a comma different, not even a comma or an and. And he voted against them every single time when I introduced those bills. And the minute a Democrat had them, he voted against them. So I'm saying, when you talk about bipartisanship, you need to know we have a long history of being in the assembly, and, now he's our representative.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So the next question, supporting the police and wanting to hold them accountable for wrongdoing aren't mutually exclusive issues. Communities of color do have legitimate concerns. Have you shown support for both groups? If so, how? And how, if you were elected, would you try to facilitate bringing together the two different sides here in order to resolve some of the outstanding differences that are?
Yeah, absolutely. We have prejudice, we have racism throughout every community where there's humankind. It's been not something that I don't know if we'll ever totally be able to eradicate. We've made tremendous improvements in terms of our laws as a lawyer. A lot of those somewhat racist type of language and usage has been taken out of our laws. Unfortunately, you're dealing with imperfect beings. They're human beings. I think our police, for the most part, I would say the large majority do a very good job. Those that don't, though, we have disciplinary options for them. I know that in Utica, we have worked and spent a lot of money to work with our communities of color, and we have a massive refugee community in Utica, where I worked actually with the refugee center. I used to live in Yugoslavia, and most of the refugees in our community are Bosnian, but we also brought refugees in from all across the world in war-torn areas, whether it was, from Myanmar, from Sudan, and all through Asia. We have, refugees. 37 languages are spoken in the Utica City School District, and I know that some of those refugees are actually in the Binghamton area. So I worked very hard. I actually did the very first Black and Latino newspaper. I published it here in my newspaper business, working with Ed Moss, a former Syracuse University basketball star. We did that until we sold our paper, of course, and then Ed sadly passed away. But we've done a lot to try to bring those communities of color together. I attended a number of inner city events this summer and have in the past. I used to serve on the JCTOD, which is an inner city after school program for inner city youth. Was mostly affiliated or next to Martin Luther King School, which is an elementary school in inner city Utica. I served on that board and worked a lot with those groups and making sure that our police, were held accountable, but also Our police work very closely with these communities. And when I attended these events this summer, I found the people of color were very concerned about the defunding the police movement. They felt that they were being co-opted by the abolitionists, Antifa, and other groups that really weren't part of what they stand for. And a lot of them wanted to see the kind of example that's been led with our Utica Police Department. And they were very gracious and very happy to see us. I was the only person of a candidate, I might add, that actually attended any of their events. We had a great couple of events. They were very prayerful, very forward-looking, and we had every one of our events. We had great support. So, we're working hard on that. But the answer, and the Black leaders in my community, the answer is not defunding the police. It is not going after police. Everybody's horrified by George Floyd. If there's one thing that unifies all of us, and I don't care what kind of guy George Floyd is, that's not the issue. It is the way he was treated by bad police officers. And he should be, these police officers, the one that did it and the ones that witnessed it and did nothing, should be held accountable. I stood up this year in inner city Utica. There was a terrible situation with a police officer. I was one of the first people to come out and call for his immediate removal from the police department. It was published in a local newspaper. Nobody else really picked it up, but I mean, the guy's behavior was unacceptable. It looked like, I don't care how bad the defendant was, the police officers are government. And when the government is kicking a guy in the head under arrest, I don't care if the guy's on crack or whatever it is, it's not the proper behavior, and he should be terminated, and he was. So this is the kind of stuff that we need to do. We need to crack down on bad police officers. We need to continue to bridge the gaps, bring people together. And honestly, there's a lot more that we have in common, and I think that's some of what has come together here. But I feel like we've worked really hard on that issue. I think I would love to go back to Congress and do more on it. I think what my opponent has done, being a personal injury lawyer, taking a ton of money from a personal injury lobbying group, a couple of days before the bill he voted on to eliminate what's called qualified immunity, which would protect some police officers while they're doing their job. I think that's really disingenuous. I mean, that is what he did. He took money, and he's also sued police officers in his practice as a personal injury lawyer. So he has something to gain by doing that. And I don't think exposing our police officers to greater liability is the answer, especially because we have laws in place if they do something wrong. We have labor laws. We also have standards that are in place that we can do something about. I would say another thing I talked about it earlier this summer, is possibly a national standard, putting out guidelines of how other states, cities, and towns should act and have a guideline.
Sure. Just one or possibly two follow-ups there. One, the first, the defunding. I'm glad you brought up the ideas about defunding, particularly because I think that most of the extreme rhetoric surrounding that is defunding, but I think the more moderate voices often suggest that what they're really getting at, or they think is more appropriate, is where are we allocating those resources? For instance, to mental health issues. Should the police, who have been burdened with mental health response over the last 30 to 40 years, should we find alternatives to having them do that? And we're curious what your stance is on those types of changes.
Yeah, in terms of allocating resources and saying defund, take resources away, look, we've got to call it like you see it. We've got to be honest with each other about this. When you take valuable resources away from a police department that are worth millions of dollars, you can't call that not defunding and not taking resources away. I advocate bringing more resources in. And my opponent voted on a bill that would cut resources and the inability of police departments, local municipal police departments, from getting equipment that they could reuse from burn grants, from the 1033 program, which is stuff that they could get through the military. All those things were cut. That was something that's been battered back and forth depending on which administration was in place. He voted for that. And then he put in a bill on July 16th claiming to defund cities that defund the police. It's the most disingenuous effort I've ever seen of backpedaling by anyone. And I'll tell you why. He put a bill up on July 16th. There was no bill language. It was just a title, defund cities, you defund the police. It's pure messaging. It's never going to even get out of a committee. It's never going to get on a vote on the floor. Pelosi, AOC, the gang will not let that out. So to me, if you're really serious about this, try to get something done where we're actually working with our police. Anthony never went and worked with the police departments like Utica and Binghamton and talked to them. He did speak with them on the phone, and they all urged him not to vote for the George Floyd policing bill, and he voted for it anyway. And that's why 187 PBAs are supporting me. That's why every major police department, and they're in unofficial capacity and their personal capacity, are supporting me here, except for one. And the one is, is a Democrat who has a common donor with Anthony Brindisi, their largest donor, the biggest donor, a casino boss from up here, and that's who supports him. I'm just, we can mince words, but I mean, we've got to deal with truths here. People are dying. Our communities in the inner city are in peril. They need support. They need security, and I think we need to be strong on this. We need to protect them. And I mean, to say that, that somehow we can't say that, we're defunding the police. It's exactly what's happening.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question. Many young Americans are delaying starting families and becoming homeowners because of the amount of student loan debt that they have. How do you see your ability to help student loan borrowers, and are you in favor of debt forgiveness? If so, how, why, or not?
Well, one of the biggest problems we have is I graduated from college in 1983, and we've spent 30 or 40 years trying to make college affordable. So we turned our entire student loan program over to the federal government. And I think that we haven't put a good guardrails in place to make sure that that type of loan program is secured. I think we have a lot of people who are paying enormous amounts to go to college, and now they're stuck with this debt. We have a community college system that I think is great, and I think that we should try to find alternative ways of getting people to get the education they need for what they can afford. I do think that we've got to make college more affordable. We've got to deal with the administrative burden that has been, or administrative sort of bloating that's come with a lot of these colleges. When I went to college, it was $7,000 a year. I went to Colgate University. Today, it's $77,000 a year, and my $7,500 paid for room, board, my tuition, everything, and I lived on campus. So this is a problem, and I know a lot of young people come to me with this. I'm not sure how we do the college forgiveness unless we can maybe put it in a points program or come up with a way that we can track this, because you're telling the taxpayers that they've got to pay for student loan programs, and maybe we could do it a merit-based way that people who do go to college and do show that they're getting the grades and meeting certain parameters, that they're not in a huge absentee rate, they're not going to college for 7 and 8 years. That they're actually getting there. I mean, I used to be on a community college board, and, it was shocking. I was also on a school of nursing board. I mean, what was shocking to me when I was on a community college board is the actual graduation rate. It was less than 20%. And, people finishing in 2 years. And there are a lot of reasons why someone in a community college couldn't finish. Family reasons, there could be health problems. A lot of them tend to be older students as well. But, we have to get to the heart of the problem and find out why students what is their mission in going to college, and make sure that we're not just putting the taxpayers on the hook, but we're also giving some kind of incentive for students to get their loans paid back in the event that they show that they're going to either get good attendance or get good grades or meet some kind of measurable standard.
Okay. So now I think you touched on this, but I want to just dive a little bit deeper as a follow-up. Technical education as opposed to straight university education. So there's been a lot of talk about the changing of should everybody go to a four-year college, and there's technical careers that can be pursued where people can find both meaningful, gainful employment, meaningful education. What is your policies on pursuing that or encouraging that? Do you or
well, actually, one of my very first bills, initiatives that when I was in the state assembly, was to bring back the school diploma so that students could actually get their GED, they could go into the military, and they wouldn't be forced into the Regents diploma that wasn't appropriate for everybody, that there was a choice that had been there when I was younger and not there. We almost got it passed I worked with Assemblyman Magnarelli from the Syracuse area. We almost got that passed. It just got thrown out at the last minute by Governor Cuomo. But this bill is continuing. Anthony introduced that bill, my identical language again. But I'm not, as I said, there's no pride in ownership, and the sincerest form of flattery is imitation. So I'm all for that, as long as the initiative gets done. And so I think that career and technical is a huge opportunity for us to get students and get people back to work. I worked with the president and Ivanka Trump. We had a huge initiative. We went to the White House. We traveled all over this district. Ivanka came here, talked about investing in career and technical education for people who may have been displaced. I was part of a group, a women's employment resource company, which actually allowed women to come back out of the workplace who were displaced to get back into the workplace, giving them career advancement. And I'm a huge donor to that group. The name's been changed again, but it was work when I was there. So, I think it's really important to give people a second chance or third chance, or make sure we're people who want to be productive and want to go back to work, incentivize them. I did numerous business roundtables where we actually brought a lot of ideas. The German idea was actually to bring in and have the companies, not the taxpayers, have the companies invest in getting the career and technical education done using BOCES programs and other programs. I tried to do that with my family business. I tried to buy a press and work with BOCES to get my students trained and have them as apprentices so that they could learn how to run a 4-color press, learn how to be in the printing business, in the newspaper industry. Those things are things we did in the past. I think it'd be great if we could bring them back, because we have more and more Americans coming, having the opportunity to work in our communities, which I think is great, because because of the tax cuts, because of rolling back regulations, because of the work that we did and made in America and bringing jobs back to this country, the jobs are there. We just need people to fill them and need them trained to do those jobs so that they can have success like so many in the past have.
Thank you. Okay, next question. The 22nd Congressional District is medically underserved. There is a physician shortage that is expected to worsen as more physicians go out into retirement. Congress, through their Medicare funding, controls how many residency spots there are nationwide in the country. To train more physicians, Congress needs to approve more residency slots. There was a bill in the current Congress called the Resident Physician Shortage Act. It was introduced in this last Congress, was stalled. How do you think we should address this? I know there's the bill out there. I guess first question is, do you support the bill? Second question is, what do you feel on this particular issue, and how do we advance it?
I don't know of the details on the bill. I've served on just about every hospital board up here. My dad was chairman of the board of one of our hospitals here for 15 years, long ago, but I continued on working with the hospital boards and also working with nursing homes. One of the biggest problems we have is New York has one of the worst healthcare systems in the nation in terms of the bureaucratic nightmare of trying to get your bills paid, trying to get the costs down. And I think it's an issue. Obviously, doctors, many of them leave. I have a lot of friends who I went to school with, or people who've come here. They don't stay for very long. Next thing you know, they go somewhere else. There's a lot more liability in New York as well. That's another issue. But I'm not sure exactly what the details of the bill are, but I'm not sure it's all because of retirements as much as it is so many doctors have left for better places to serve, because it is a tough place, in terms of bureaucracy if you're a doctor. And we have to do something about, the ACA. It's just not working for the middle class. And when the middle class isn't getting served, that's the majority of people, the doctors are not able to deliver the care they're delivering. And so one of the things we did to reform, and similarly, is, we have a single payer system called the VA. And my son's an active duty Marine right now, and we have over 50,000 veterans in this district. We reformed the VA to give veterans a choice that they were going to doctors, but the federal government wasn't paying. And so a lot of doctors stopped servicing veterans. So what we did is, you have to take somebody, if they're a veteran, even, just a referral, they have to be served within so many days, and the federal government guarantees that payment. I've talked to vets for the last year or so who are raving about how great this is. I've heard them over and over. Obviously, I have a lot of friends, especially the Marine Corps League and a lot of the different groups, because my son's a Marine. But they're telling me that what we did with the VA mission, a bill I co-sponsored, one of the most important legislative pieces of our Congress, has given people a chance to now get health care. I think we should look at similar models in our area where people who are needy get a chance to get to whatever doctor they need to get to. And when I say needy, I mean, if you're on Medicaid, you tend to have a chance to get in other than waiting for in line and other things. But the middle class are the people that have been given, the short shrift. People who are paying really high premiums and really high deductibles are basically self-insured. I mean, they're literally just buying, a plastic insurance card, and they can't afford to go to the doctor. I'm not a great example. I pay for my own insurance through my family business. But, I went from spending $80 a month for healthcare to now spending almost $400, and my deductible is $6,700 a year. I still haven't met my deductible. So every medical need that I have right now is out of pocket until I reach that $6,700 threshold. That is way beyond what a middle-class family can afford. The average cost of a family plan in New York State is $20,000. Ours, in our case, because we have a commitment to our employees, it's $26,000 per family before they even put in 1 day of work. So we are fighting to make sure, we're trying to find choices, make it more affordable, bring the costs down. And we've done everything we can to make that happen. And I keep hearing these false commercials over and over and over that, $15 or $30 million has been spent against me in the last 2 cycles, saying that I'm against people with pre-existing conditions. I actually helped my uncle to trademark one of the very first diabetic measures. It was called the Diabet Kit for diabetics, long before we had the kind of portability that we have now. My family is rife with people with pre-existing conditions: diabetes, heart disease, cancer. I co-authored the bill, and the language of the bill was included in the bill that we passed in the House that guaranteed that people with pre-existing conditions would be covered and must be covered. So all of that is a falsehood. I just want to dispel. It's just completely unbelievable that nobody has fact-checked that. But that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Our next
I got
question.
2 minutes because I got this thing at 3:00. So.
Okay. Next question: agricultural subsidies. Agricultural subsidies generally go to big farms and not small farms. How do you feel we could address changing that, particularly because here in the 22nd District, the vast majority of our farms are small family-owned farms? Are you supportive of shifting funding away from the large farms, the large factory farms, down to small family farms in future bills if you were elected?
Well, this is a huge personal issue for me, since my family members were dairy farmers, were beef cattle farmers, now are in crops because they can't afford to do dairy or beef at this point with what's going on in the beef industry. And my cousin was actually head of the New York State Beef Council for many, many years. Our dairy farmers are, in my family, it's just impossible with what New York State has done to dairy in terms of the really high costs. Now there's a farm labor bill. The regulations that make it almost impossible for a dairy farm, and add the federal government, which requires that the price is determined by a milk order. So our dairy farmers need all the relief they can get. They have gotten none of it from Albany. I served there, obviously with family members describing what's going on here. A lot of what happens in the Farm Bill, for example, and a lot of those things do tend to go towards some of the larger farms. But we worked very hard and reformed the margin protection program, which actually helps dairy farmers. I've been talking to a number of dairy farmers here who've been really struggling through the COVID crisis, who have said that has been a lifesaver for them. The former Farm Bill was terrible. It didn't solve the problem. We made it better for them. So one of the interesting things, though, during this COVID crisis, the first bill that the Senate proposed in the CARES Act allocated $50 billion for farmers, $50 billion for agriculture. By the time Nancy Pelosi came back from her fancy ice cream in San Francisco and voted on this bill, the one they put on the House, they actually cut the bill. Instead of $50 billion going to the farmers, it dropped to $23 billion. And that's a huge problem. Anthony voted for that. He's trying to say he's pro-ag. I don't know where he's getting that. I mean, they voted to strip the farmers. And then on April 17th, President Trump actually did a press conference and took $28 million that he received from Chinese tariffs on agriculture and gave those to our farmers, our ranchers, and our crop growers, because Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats had defunded them. And so, I looked to the president, I know Anthony has spoken out repeatedly against the tariffs, and I know that in some cases they've been difficult, but the tariffs really were more harmful for the larger farms than they were for the smaller ones. I also fought to get a classification for Class 6 milk because it was being dumped in here from Canada. So I've done a lot on the farm issue. I will say my opponent serves on the Ag Committee. The only two things I think he's done is introduce two bills. word for word, not a comma out of place, of my bills that are still sitting there waiting for the Democrats to pass. I hope that people elect me and we get that done so we can help our farm community who are my family members.
Okay. So I know we're short of time here. So
yeah, I really got to.
Just closing things up here. You are you're running in one of the most competitive districts in the United States in this race. So we wanted to make sure we gave you a short opportunity to state your case. Why do you think you would be the best candidate for this position right now?
Right. Well, I'm a proven leader. I have had to fight through both parties, Democrats and Republicans. I've always had a primary to challenge the status quo, the political insiders in both parties. My opponent has never had a primary. My opponent has always had a gilded path, whether it was his father paving the way and spending $40,000 or $50,000 to get him elected to the school board. He got handpicked by Sheldon Silver to be assembly member and record resources given to him to win that seat. He's never had a primary. He had $15 million in his race in 2018, which is the most that's ever been spent in the history of our region on a single candidate. I've had more spent against me than any candidate in our region. Today, it'll be $44 million in just 5.5 years. My opponent is also outspending me 3-1 here. I'm a truth teller. I'm trying to set the record straight as a Republican, independent, who's practical and common sense. I've been cast as everything you can think of. Whether I'm in a primary, I'm called liberal. If I'm in a general election, I'm called conservative. I'm just a common sense business owner that really wants to help our community. I'm honest about where I stand. I tell the people where they are. I've heard all kinds of things. I don't do town halls. I did 11 town halls. I did 5 or 6 town halls that were actually teletown halls when we had issues. I've done hundreds of public events. I mean, I've hardly seen my opponent at anything, anywhere in this district, especially this year. I outpaced him by events 2 or 3-1 in terms of events and meeting with people. Every single person who has requested a meeting with me in my office when I served in Congress got a meeting. Some of them were 15 or 20 minutes. Some of them were an hour and a half or 2 hours. My opponent rejects people who request to meet with him every single day. They call me all the time and tell me, how can he say that? I'm just like setting the record straight. I know people may not want to hear that, but there's an awful lot of money being spent against me to try to distort my great record and what I've done. I'm an independent person. I'm not some millionaire. My dad's not driving around in a Rolls Royce. You know, we are very modest. I don't have a lot of income. We've struggled as a business. I raised my son as a single mom. He's now serving in the military as a captain in the Marine Corps. I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to have to make payroll. That's something my opponent's never really had to worry about. You know, he's always had plenty of resources, a family with millions and millions of dollars. And I've had to actually take care of my parents in their final years while running my business and raising my son as a single parent. You know, these are challenges that are real to a lot of people in this community that I just can't get out. I can't get the media to talk about it. I can't get my message out. I don't have the money to spend like he does, but we're trying in every way we can to get our good record out. I'm grateful for the support of President Trump. I think people should know that in the event that the president loses and we lose and we continue to lose the House of Representatives, you're going to see your taxes go up by $4 trillion. Every gain that you got in the last few years when we were in Congress is going to be rolled back. You're going to have the Green New Deal. You're going to have, which is something that my opponent supports. He actually voted against responsible gas drilling 4 times while he was a member of the Assembly. These are things that people have to look into, that these are real. These are going to affect our economic condition. I'm a compassionate advocate. I care about the people I represent. I work really hard for any group and everyone that wants the help. And I have a strong record of doing that throughout my life and throughout my term in Congress and in the Assembly. So I hope people will look to our website, claudiaforcongress.com, learn a little more about me and what I actually stand for. I hope that people turn out and vote. It's your right to vote. Please do so. If you can in person, that's great. If you're not able to, you can do it by absentee ballot. But, I'm grateful for you for giving me a chance to speak and to set the record straight. There's a lot of positive things that could happen in our communities. We've seen a lot of downturn. We've seen a lot of bad things happen, whether it's losing IBM, losing Endicott Johnson, seeing what's happened to our communities through the opioid epidemic and a number of things. I fought to bring those resources back. And when I disagreed with the president, I actually called him and said, let's fix this. My opponent voted to impeach him. And now he's running some crazy, somehow I have something to do with Spectrum Cable. He's the one that teamed up with Andrew Cuomo and gave Spectrum a monopoly And he's the one that needs to call Governor Cuomo and end that monopoly. It has absolutely nothing to do with me or with this race. I'm the only person in this race who has not accepted money from Spectrum Cable during this term. He has accepted almost $400,000 through dark money super PAC, bypass PACs from Spectrum Cable and their donors. And understand something, corporations cannot give to individual candidates. 75% of my opponents' donations come from big Wall Street, fat cats and people like that. They're not coming from small donors like I have across the nation, small business owners. And that's why I'm supported by the small business community. They know that I have their back. So anyway, I know I got to run, but I really appreciate your time and thanks so much. And thanks for giving me an opportunity to set the record straight.
Okay. Former representative and current candidate Claudia Tenney, the Republican candidate for New York's 22nd District. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I am here with Keith Price, the Libertarian candidate for New York's 22nd Congressional District. Mr. Price, thank you for taking the time to join us and answer some questions today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy speaking with each and every voter, regardless of age.
All right. So, Mr. Price, we'll get right to the questions here. First up, do you consider yourself to be bipartisan? And if so, how have you demonstrated that in your actions or voting record if you've been in service anywhere else? Who are some of the people of the other party that you feel you would have good relationships with or do have good relationships with?
Well, first of all, bipartisan, the term bipartisan means two parties. And I'm actually beyond bipartisan. I'm all partisan. And that is I will work with anyone to get things accomplished. As a libertarian, I believe the only leadership I need to take doesn't come from a party leader, but comes from the voters of the 22nd Congressional District and the Constitution of the United States of America. So to answer your question, I will work with anyone. Who specifically? Everyone. I will work with anyone and everyone who wants to work with me to make our district and our nation a better country to live in. So names don't matter to me. Parties don't matter to me. Platforms don't matter to me. What matters to me is getting things done for this district and the voters of this district. So I am all partisan. I will work with anyone. I will ignore labels. I will ignore party affiliations because good ideas should never be tied to a label or a letter or a color. We should come together, harvest good ideas, and then let them culture and grow. So I will work with anyone if it moves us forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So our next question is supporting the police and wanting them to be held accountable for wrongdoing are not mutually exclusive issues. Communities of color do have legitimate concerns. Have you shown your support for both groups? If so, how? And if you were elected, how do you think you would facilitate bringing both sides of that issue together to try and have an impact and resolve some of those issues?
Well, I firmly believe that not all police are bad. There may be one in every 100,000. I don't know the exact number of officers in our great country, but there are hundreds of thousands of police officers, and they are human. They make mistakes. They make poor choices. And in my opinion, they need to be held accountable. Conversely, with the Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement, I believe that all lives matter. We shouldn't single out a specific group. I think we should treat all groups respectfully and evenly, and all lives matter. So how do we bring the two together? Well, first and foremost, what we need to do is we need to offer our police and our communities assistance. One of the better ways of doing that is by demilitarizing our police officers. So many police departments are taking federal dollars and buying tanks and SWAT teams and drones. We don't need all that. Let's take those funds and let's offer the officers counseling, addiction recovery programs. Let's advance their training. Let's come up with modern day training. So how does that tie to the community? Well, in order to advance that modern day training, what we need is we need community organizers, we need community leaders, and individuals who live in the neighborhoods to meet with police, not at a federal level, at the actual community level. And they need to come together and say, this is what works for Detroit. This is what works for Binghamton. This is what works for Albany. Then when they decide what works for their community, they can tell state leaders and they can tell federal leaders, this is the direction we need to go. I would never legislate or mandate across the board sweeping reforms. One size fits all doesn't always work in Nebraska and Vestal the same way. So what we need to do is we need communities to tell federal government, this is where we need to go with policing. This is what we're going to do with our new training. Then we can look at the whole country and say, these are the trends. These are the areas of improvement. Here are some guidelines, recommendations all police forces take part in. I would love to see more community involvement in our policing. I would like community to be involved in policing by having officers do things inside their communities outside of the uniform, and by having community leaders work with officers in things where the officers are outside of uniforms, things like barbecues or picnics or meet the community leader night, things like that. And it costs little to no money to do these things. It's just common sense. It really is.
Okay, thanks. Now I do have a follow-up here because of one of the, so in your comment you mentioned about the All Lives Matter movement, and I did want to just dive a little bit deeper into that. And I think that most people who support Black Lives Matter would push back and say that maybe the question for you is, when you say all lives matter, are you really, there's no real question that communities of color face disproportionate racial issues and racism and those types of things. So that type of statement usually highlights those issues specifically. Can you elaborate a little bit on the distinction that you're making between all lives matter and Black Lives Matter?
Sure, absolutely. When I say all lives matter, what I mean is that each and every individual in our country has creator-given and constitutional-given rights that no government, no police entity, no organization should ever infringe upon. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are those famous sort of terms that people use. So when I say all lives matter, when any department of state or government infringe on your life, when they come in, when they start dictating or legislating morality, what they've done is they've burdened you unnecessarily. And government wasn't created to burden you. Government was created to assist you and aid you and to give you guidelines. So to say that Black Lives Matters is very important. Black lives absolutely matters. But so do Hispanic. All minorities matter. All individuals matter. And I'm going to make a quick tie here. To prove what I mean by all lives matter, I cannot stomach when I hear politicians from any party refer to human beings as illegals. There is no such thing. I'll repeat that. There is no such thing as an illegal human being. Every human being is a person with rights and guarantees regardless of race, sexual orientation, religious belief, or party affiliation. All people should be treated the exact same under the eyes of the law as everyone. No color, no sex, no religious belief, government fairness for one and all.
I see. Okay. Thank you. So as a corollary to that, I'll touch on systemic racism. So systemic racism, do you believe that that's an issue in our society? If so, yes, no. What do you think we should do about it? If so,
I believe we have systemic racism, and I think it's a little further than systemic racism. I believe it's what's called institutional racism. We've created programs and policies and legislation that specifically target minorities within our communities, all the way from federal regulations down to local regulations. These specific entities, such as the Department of Social Services, have rules and regulations that are meant to separate people, that are meant to keep people on the system, that are meant to create a pyramid scheme. I think what we've done is we've allowed policies and we've allowed legislation and we've allowed bureaucratic red tape to institutionalize racism. We need to overhaul our systems. We need to overhaul our legislation, eliminate redundancies, and we need to be more mindful of the people we're trying to help. When you create a policy that forces a person under a living wage cap, and then you say to them, these are the only benefits I'll give you, you force them into poverty. We've got forced poverty policies. We've got institutional racism within police policies, things like stop and frisk and racial profiling. Well, those are supposed to be done away with. You and I both know they still happen each and every day in our country. So we need to take those institutions. We need new training, we need new direction, and we need new regulation, or we need to remove regulation so that people don't feel oppressed by a system that was designed to help them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that elaboration. Next question. Many young Americans are delaying starting families and becoming homeowners because of the amount of student debt that they owe. How, if elected, will you help federal student loan borrowers? Are you in favor of debt forgiveness? And if so, how much? Or if not, why not?
First and foremost, the biggest mistake we made here was allowing the federal government to become a banking operation. When the federal government decides to get into business for the sake of getting into business, it only hurts the less fortunate, the individuals who the government doesn't think of. So the first thing I would like to do is I would like to get the federal government out of college debt, out of student loans. Let's let that privatize. Let's let individuals find better ways to get to educational needs. Then I would like to clear the board. I would like to take all the student debt you've accrued that you now owe the federal government. No person should ever owe the federal government money, with the exception of corporations who should always pay their fair share and high income earners who should pay their fair share of taxes. So no student should own, especially one living on a part-time job, should owe the federal government money. So let's clear the board. No one owes the federal government anything. So we've cleared the board. All your debts are forgiven. We've got federal government out of the loan business. That's actually going to make college more affordable, because what's going to happen is colleges are going to say, we want this group of students to come to our college, but they can only afford X amount a year. We're going to have to lower tuitions so that our choice students can afford to come to our college and offer programs for those that still may not be able to afford it. And that's going to cause the cost of education to go down. When we reduce the cost of education, that means more people have access to education. And there's never a bad thing to have a country full of well-educated, well-thought-out individuals. So let's get federal government out of the loan business. Let's clear the deck and make it so that everyone's starting at zero. And then let's reduce the cost of education by allowing a free market, and let's educate our population.
All right, thank you. So follow up to that, technical education specifically. So there's been a lot of talk in more recent years about, given the rise of cost of university education, that technical skills education is a valid and viable path for many folks who are many young folks coming up. And there's been numerous programs to try and move people into that or talk about that as alternatives to college. How do you feel about that? What do you think we could do, and what do you support or not support?
Well, I believe a technical education is sound. I believe we need more masons, more electricians, more plumbers. I believe we need more skilled and technical workers at all levels. I think a college education is great, but maybe college isn't for you. Maybe 40, 50 years ago when you got out of high school, or even 10 years ago you got out of high school, you turned to the military because, you know, it's the only thing you've got going for you. Being that I don't believe turning to the military is always the answer, we need more technical schools, and we need to make technical schools more accessible, and more affordable and more viable. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is, again, sort of a free market principle. When universities see that there's an area to make money, when any business sees an opportunity to make money, they generally do what they can to make that money. So if we say to universities, we are going to let you have your campus, we're going to let you be Binghamton University or SUNY Broome, but if you want to open up a private for-profit technical school or trade school on your campus or at a satellite location, and you want to offer incentives for students to go there, we'll support it. We'll find a way to make it happen. We'll help you. And that's going to give these individuals who are stuck between the military and high school and college, it's going to give them a place to go. They're going to find a trade. And when they find a trade, they're going to come back into society as adults with an education and with a skill that maybe they have. He might be the only electrician in the neighborhood. He might be the only certified plumber in the neighborhood. That's going to make him not only a viable member of society, it's also going to make him a money maker and a community leader and an individual we look forward to working with.
All right, thank you. Our next question. The 22nd Congressional District is medically underserved. There is a physician shortage that is expected to worsen as more physicians go into retirement. Now, Congress, through its Medicare funding, controls how many residency spots are available in the United States. To train more physicians, Congress needs to approve more residency slots. Congress has one path, and that is one path to approve more residency slots. How do you feel about addressing this type of a shortage, and do you have ideas on which we can, and maybe specifically even here in the 22nd District where we have a shortage already?
Well, again, I mentioned this earlier, so I'm going to take the opportunity to mention it again. When government gets in business for the sake of getting in business, what happens is they see dollar signs, and the initial intent of the program goes away under bureaucratic red tape and under making a dollar and under good intentions. So I would like to see the federal government move out of healthcare altogether. If the federal government moved out of healthcare and we deregulated and eliminated redundancies and we sort of shifted our direction, more of a guidance program, here are guidance, not hard and fast regulations, what would happen in districts like the 22nd is the individual communities would say, here is our need. We need more residents. We need more doctors. Our economy can sustain it. It's a service we want. The product is available. Let's deliver it. So by eliminating Congress, by taking Congress out of the process, what we've done is we've let communities make their own decisions, what's best for them. And that allows hospitals, especially the nonprofit hospitals, to open up the doors and say, these are our needs, these are our shortages. But it also harkens back to a previous question you asked as well, and that is education. If you are a young up-and-coming medical student, you might get dissuaded by $80,000 of federally held debt. So you might bail on the medical program. I believe that if we fix the education system and make college and medical school more affordable, law school more affordable, then we will have more individuals pursuing the field. And as they pursue the field, they will become free agents on the market. And again, with government out, they will stay home or they will go to a market where they can make money and have a good, sound job. So by removing the cap and getting federal government out, what would happen is local area hospitals in Syracuse or Binghamton would be able to say, these are our needs, here are our vacancies, we want to hire X number, apply at this spot, apply at this link. So again, remove the federal government, allow the free market to work, allow the communities and the hospitals to decide what their magic number should be, not the federal government.
Let's see. Okay. Thank you. Next question, agricultural subsidies. So here in the 22nd District, we have a lot of farms. In particular, we have a lot of smaller family farms. Dairy is a big farming industry here. Most of the agricultural subsidies that are handed out by the federal government across the United States go to large farms and not small farms. This disparity causes undue hardship on the smaller farms in particular. How do you feel you could address this in Congress? And would you be in favor of shifting funding if you were in Congress from the larger farms to the smaller farms specifically?
Well, I know for a fact, just because I live not far from one, there is a very large, fully functioning corporate farm that receives an egregious amount of subsidies. So what I would like to do is I would like to take the subsidy pie, and I would like to say, here's what we need to do. We need to divide the pie more evenly. Instead of using the old-fashioned, how many cattle do you have, how many crops do you produce, we want to see your actual needs. What are your bills? What are your revenue? And that will allow us to allocate these funds more appropriately. But while we do that, again, what we should be doing is looking for better solutions. Giving the farmers money is great and it keeps them in business, but subsidies alone can't keep a farm running. So what we need, or shouldn't keep a farm running. So what we need to do is we need to continue to give them these funds. We need to continue to subsidize until we come up with a better system, a better program, a better way to sell your goods, to sell your services. We need farmers. Farmers are the backbone of this country. But we're losing the small farm day in and day out to the large corporate conglomerates. And that's an important segue. I mentioned that some of these large farms, like the one I live near, is a corporate conglomerate. It's owned by a corporation. The farmers I know and the farmers I like working with are the guys that live down the street. You know them by their first name. They've been farmers. They're third-generation farmers. The farm is 150 years old. These big corporate farms, while they provide goods to America, they are nameless and they are faceless, and they're abusing the subsidy system just like they abuse our tax system. So let's look at these corporate farms and determine their actual needs versus their wants and adjust subsidies accordingly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our last question is on daycare or childcare. So here in the 22nd district, and this is really a problem that affects many nationwide, but there's a shortage of childcare. There's a shortage of childcare slots. There's a shortage of workers in childcare. It's a very big challenge given the current situation that we're in with the coronavirus pandemic. Some of these have actually become even more acute as we've been trying to get people back to work or find slots for kids at different times and things of that nature. How would you, if elected, try to address these issues and fix some of the child care issues that we have out there?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do will address a lot of issues, and that is I am calling on all levels of government, because it truly is an all level of government issue. I want to suspend, call it a holiday, if you will. I want a tax holiday on all income and payroll taxes. That means money that normally leaves working Americans' paychecks stays in their paychecks. It never leaves, which allows them to have a little more money in their pocket. So that little bit of extra money can help you buy food in this time of need, can help you pay a mortgage in this time of need, can help you pay for childcare in this time of need. What we need to do is we need to realize that we are in a situation where a pandemic has caused a dynamic, maybe, hopefully temporary, shift in the way our nation does business. So I think what we need to do is we need to temporarily lighten regulations, loosen the belt a little bit, allow those who want to get into the child care industry or those already in the child care industry to hire more, to offer slightly better wages. It's hard to do in a tough economy, but if we repeal the income and the payroll taxes, if we slightly lessen small business taxes, and if we tell these individuals, you've got your licenses, you've got your permits, we're going to just let you work, and we incentivize them by saying, hey, the more you do and the more guidelines you adhere to, social distancing, wear masks, you follow hand sanitizing procedures and all this stuff, what we're going to do is we're going to grade you. We're going to give you an A+. That A+ just goes in your window. It has no monetary backing except for the fact that you and I and everyday New Yorkers can see and go, that's an A+ establishment. That means if I do business there, I know I'm going to get clean people, safe people, people who are going to actually respect our cares and needs. And because I have a little bit more money, because I'm not paying income tax right now, I can afford health care at this establishment. The establishment is going to make more money. They're going to be able to hire more people. That's going to allow them to handle more children. I think child care has been vastly overlooked in our nation during this pandemic, and I would like to see it sort of free market up a little. But the best way to jumpstart is by giving Americans more money to spend on child care, or by temporarily providing them with waivers or quick little write-offs. Hey, write off child care for the next 9 months. That's something the state can do. That's something the federal government can do that would help right now, today, without me even being elected. But once elected, I can take those programs, see what we did that worked, see what we did that didn't work, refine them, and then make them permanent. Because when we make those programs permanent, when the next event happens, whatever it may be, we will already have a functioning system in place.
Okay. I do have a follow-up from that. You had mentioned about suspending taxes, payroll taxes in particular. So I think that doing that would really only benefit the folks who are employed. So how would we address the unemployed in that scenario?
Well, I want to recertify and continue the special benefits through unemployment. The extra, I believe it was $800 a week.
$600.
Yeah, $600. I want to recertify those because the reality of it is I've mentioned this earlier, everyday Americans, you, myself, the guy down the street, we're sitting at home right now with our checkbook and our banking app, and we're seeing how much money we have, and we're deciding, do we want to buy food or pay the mortgage? Everyday Americans are tightening their belt during this pandemic, and they're choosing, what services do I cut? What services do I keep? I think the state and the federal government needs to do that. And then when they decide what we're going to cut and what we're going to keep, they need to cut a little further than that so that we open up money for Americans right now. We recertify the special unemployment benefits, all while working toward finding a system that works better. We were caught off guard. We should have had a plan. We should have been better prepared. We weren't. We've learned a lesson. So now let's take what we've learned. Let's see what works. Let's see what doesn't work and come up with a singular plan moving forward. So let's recertify those benefits to help disabled Americans, to help those not working. And then we can have actual conversations about how to make these types of programs permanent, or more importantly, how to have a safety net if the floor collapses again. And the big thing here to remember is a lot of politicians are playing games, whether they're left games or right games. They're trying to draw this out. They're trying to drag it out to the election and maybe beyond. I need the politicians in our country, both at state, local, and federal levels, to stop playing political games. What they need to do is remember that they work for the people of this district and work for the people of America, and they need to set their politics aside and do what's right for us today, not after the election, hoping they get reelected. So let's extend those special benefits. Let's start looking at programs. Let's start having nonpartisan conversations about what we can do to create a safety net moving forward.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
you. Excuse me, the last thing here is the 22nd Congressional District Race is one of the most competitive in the United States. You are up against two other candidates, and we wanted to certainly give you an opportunity to state the case of why you feel you would be the best candidate for this job.
Believe it or not, there are political pundits from Siena Research and other groups saying it's only going to take 42% to win this race. 42 to 45%. Meaning, regardless of which candidate from the other two parties you vote for, if you vote for the Republican or the Democrat and you're on the losing side, that means you and a majority of the district will not be truly represented in Washington. Ms. Tenney has held the seat. She ran for re-election 2 years ago in a district that President Trump won by 12 points. He stumped hard for her. He campaigned hard for her, and yet the voters chose to go a different direction. Mr. Brindisi, while he's had some good ideas and some bad ideas, he has lower than expected approval ratings. He's put 2 years in Congress. People are dissatisfied with some of the things he said versus some of the things he's done. But unlike my opponents, I'm not beholden to party politics. I don't bash Trump, and I'm not going to knock Nancy Pelosi, because when they do that, they basically show that they're not moving the country forward. They're not moving the district forward. They're only trying to advance party politics. And I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in advancing the district because it's what's best for the district. I want to hear what the voters have to say, and I want to do what's best for them, all within the bounds and confines of the rules set forth by the Constitution of the United States of America. So when you vote for them and you are on the losing side, you can't possibly feel like you're represented. When you vote the lesser of two evils, you are still pulling a lever or checking a box or filling a bubble for someone in your gut you feel is evil. I am not part of that system, nor will I ever be part of that system. I will work with anyone and everyone. So when elected, you will get a representative who will listen to everyone in the room, who wants 20 different opinions, even if they're from a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian, a farmer from upstate or a businessman from Binghamton. So when I get elected, I can represent you, I can represent the Constitution, and I can actually get things done only because I am not shackled by the burden of those big bloated system, that corrupt system that leaves so many Americans behind. And if we're going to talk about young leaders, the reason I'm in this race is because in a magazine article that ran about a year ago, I was named one of the top politicians under 40 in New York State. I don't know how, I don't know why, I wasn't part of it. But I'm under 40. I know what people face. I know the burdens young Americans face, and I'm willing to talk with the young voters, and I'm willing to listen to the young voters. And I can't say the same about my opponents. So when elected, I will work with everyone to get what's best done.
Okay. Now, Mr. Keith Price, the Libertarian candidate for New York's 22nd Congressional District. Mr. Price, thank you so much for your time today and answering our questions.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this outlet and outlets similar to this. In COVID, it's tough to get your message out there. We want to be smart. We want to be socially distant. We want to wear our masks. But we also want to let voters know they have choices, and that if you don't vote, you've given up your voice, and you should never give up your voice.
Which is a good reminder that Election Day is on Tuesday, and early voting in New York State has already opened. Thank you.
Thank you.